Hi, Misha here, and recently looked at Lockheed's U2 from Hobbymaster. So let's look at an older Lockheed, the P-38 Lightning. And these are two new models from Corgi. Over here we have the 38G, and here we have the 38J. And they would build over 1,000 of the G's and nearly 3,000 of the J's, which make up not quite half of overall production of this aircraft. And we waited a really long time to get the Lightnings from Corgi in the recent batches, so I figured I'd do a video kind of looking at them. Why not? This is quite an interesting and unique aircraft. Originally, it was actually classified as an interceptor, and it kind of dates back to 1937 when the U.S. Army Air Corps was looking for a high-altitude, heavily armed, long-endurance aircraft. And there was a bunch of political back and forth. It was actually classified as an interceptor instead of a P for pursuit because of some reluctance to have a twin-engine P-plane. Regardless, Lockheed worked on this. This was one of Kelly Johnson's earlier projects. And yeah, the very first prototype flew in 1939, but it took them a while to get production up and running because they had to make a new factory, and it was a large aircraft, and it was an all-metal skin. They actually did have a kind of a coast-to-coast flight to show it off in early 39. It worked well for doing that, but it also crashed, so kind of a mixed blessing there. Eventually, though, the Air Force would order, it was originally known as the XP-39. It would win trials and be ordered in limited production. There would be the YP-38. There would be 13 kind of pre-production models, and this would lead to the P-38A, which is again kind of a pre-production model, frankly. But it was officially accepted into service in the summer of 1941, and before World War II kicked off for the USA in September, October, Lockheed had built about 65. Interestingly, they skipped over P-38B and C, going straight to D. But the D models were still kind of experimental, working out the kinks. The E model was considered the first combat-capable version, and the F model was considered the first fully combat-capable version. And that gets us to our G here. Now, this is not a small aircraft. It's just under 38 feet long. It has a wingspan of 52 feet. Has the one pilot. It has two liquid-cooled Allison engines. And from the beginning, it was designed for speed and endurance. Originally, the Air Corps, later the U.S. Army Air Forces, wanted at least 360 miles per hour. This aircraft is capable of over 400, although it still liked to cruise at about 300. And it can lift quite a bit. Now, in its nose, we have 4 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns with 500 rounds each. But we also have one 20 millimeter Hispano cannon with 150 rounds. And in addition to that, we can actually carry quite a bit under the wings. And the G was the first to really come out of the factory with plumbed for drop tanks, which this model does have under here. Additionally, these could carry bombs as much as 2,000 pounds, or 1,000, or 500, or 250, in various arrangements from 2 to 6. These inner hard points are for the heavier ordnance on the outer part of the wing. Lighter ones could be mounted. You get the drift. So after the war kicked off, the P-38 was used to defend the West Coast initially. But then in 1942, they started flying them to the UK. In fact, they got over 200 sent. And this was unique because it was the first time an aircraft was able to go under its own power. Yeah, it had to stop off at Greenland and Iceland to refuel, but it could fly from America to the UK, and this was great because it avoided the U-boat threat. And these were slow to go to the Pacific because Europe had priority, but in August of 42, the P-38 would get its first kills. It would shoot down a couple of flying boats in the Pacific, and it would actually shoot down FW-200 in the Atlantic, a plane flying out of Iceland. So it had some early successes. From there, they would be stationed in North Africa for Operation Torch in November, and that's where their long-range, good endurance, and limited to ground attack ability with these earlier ones came into play. And they were used for bomber escort, they were used for fighter patrol, they were used for ground attack. Early on, primarily the bomber escort role, though. But because of tactics, or rather lack thereof, that the U.S. was using, limited success early on. But it was a good aircraft, and at the time, in 42, it was quite fast. It had good climb, it could get to altitude very quickly. It was very well armed. Having all the guns in the nose helped a lot with aiming and just synchronizing and getting things on target, and the ability to carry. But it wasn't without flaws. The big one was kind of a loss of control at speed that the Air Forces blamed on what they called flutter, but Lockheed determined the wind tunnel testings that it was actually more to do with just maximum speed and getting over Mach 0.6 and just torque and the air compressing towards the tail. And that's what kind of leads us into our next versions here. Now this is, like I said, the J. There was, of course, an H model, and with these they started working on new dive brakes to help kind of limit speed and make them more controllable, which is good. This aircraft in 1942-43 had a reputation for being a good aircraft in the hands of a skilled pilot, but being difficult to learn to fly. There wasn't a two-seat trainer available, so in a rookie pilot's hands it was quite iffy. So the H was some nominal improvements, and with the J, the dive flaps become standard. Originally they were issued as kits to be retrofitted. They would also rework the engines, the electrical systems, the cooling systems a bit, things of that nature. And you can see it on this model. The exhaust back here, or a different shape on this one. And this one has a couple of bombs under the wings. Why did I grab two? I really don't know. It's just, it took so long for these to come in. I just kind of figured why not at some point. So yeah, why not? Plus I'm happy this one just had the bombs. That's kind of neat. And different paint scheme and all that too. So by 43, these were being used more in the Pacific, where they did really well. In fact, they, I think it was around 16 of these, tracked down and shot down Admiral Yamamoto, shot down his aircraft. They really were about the only aircraft for the job because of their range, and they did the job well. In fact, in the Pacific, they shot down more Japanese aircraft than any other Allied, at least single model of Allied plane. They were still being used in the European theater, but in 1944 they kind of ceased being used for bomber escort. By this point, they're considered a little slow, frankly. But they were still good for the ground attack, and right after D-Day, they started being used for both level bombing and dive bombing more and more, going for German troop formations, German tank columns, German headquarter buildings, radar installations, ammunition depots, because it is a well-armored aircraft, and it can carry quite a bit of weight, 4,000 or 5,000 pounds with later versions. They even took some of these and made them into night fighters later on in the war. That would have been the P-38M, but that was kind of a limited thing. And the J would give way to the P-38L, which was kind of the final major production version. But they would produce these. In fact, this is the only American fighter to be mass-produced continuously throughout all of World War II, from 1941 through 1945. And it helped march on Berlin. They were used quite extensively all throughout the spring of 45. But again, it really earned their keep in the Pacific. Having 2 engines over all that water was good for pretty obvious reasons. The ability to carry multiple drop tanks or bombs. Later versions could carry rocket pods, 5-inch rockets on the wings. Very good in the Pacific for attacking ground installations. And yeah, it's just its assets were more appreciated there. This happens. I mean, certain aircraft just proved better for certain theaters. But they would help in the war over there too. In total, Lockheed would build just over 10,000 of these. So not an insignificant number. Not the most, but not insignificant, excuse me. The P-47, a little more. And this is, of course, replaced in great part by the P-51 Mustang towards the end of the war. But in the beginning of the war, it was one of America's best, most modern, most capable aircraft, even though it was quite large and did have engine issues early on with these liquid-cooled Alizons. And again, the tail flutter, the compression issue, was really only ever partially resolved by the new dive flaps. They certainly helped, but they didn't alleviate it. It was a difficult plane to fly regardless, for kind of obvious reasons. It's big and whatnot. On the other hand, yeah, having the engines and the wings gave a very good field of view for the pilot. It gave the ordnance up front. It gave lots of area on the wings for this and that. And these models from Corgi are quite neat. They've always done a good P-38. They are die-cast metal for the wings and the front part of the fuselage. The tail, much like with their British aircraft, like the Venoms and Vipers. Sorry, I'm just thinking. Vampires, that's the one I was thinking of. This is plastic back here, and I think they do it in part for balance, because it puts all the weight up front, which makes it better for the stand. Of course, you have your canopy with your pilot. You have these rotating propellers. The propellers contra-rotated. In reality, you've got the antenna below for the radio. And of course, you've got the guns up front. Very good ordnance. And they did a good job. Again, they changed up the engines and the exhausts there. A lot of the changes would have been internal. Externally, the aircraft really just didn't change that much during the war. Not as much as like the Mustang would have. But it is nice that you get the drop tanks. These are fixed. They come already glued on. I mean, you could remove them if you wanted to prime off, but when you get the model, they're fixed on. Comes with the typical kind of cradle stand where these do rotate a bit. Not metal, plastic, but this isn't especially heavy considering the size. Doop doop. And Corgi models are quite durable for what they are. They're cheaper than Hobbymaster, but not cheap. But because of the size of this thing, it's hard to get a diecast maker to do them because, well, it costs more money. Larger aircraft with 2 propellers, it's going to cost. And of course, like most all Corgis, it has gear up or down. Yeah, these came out the summer of this year, 2021. So I thought we'd just do a little revisit here. Last year they released the F5, the reconnaissance version. It really was quite the multi-role aircraft. They found quite a few uses. That said, yeah, production ended with World War II. The later ones, like the J's and the L's, would stay in U.S. Army Air Forces as it transitioned over to the U.S. Air Force, 1947-48. But these are quickly designated as ZP-38s, meaning obsolete plane, and they were officially retired before the Korean War in 1949. So, pretty short service career, 1941 through 1949. But then again, a lot of aircraft in World War II had similar length careers. But shows you Kelly Johnson's ability to create interesting planes that fulfill roles. And Lockheed, I don't know, I've always liked their design aesthetic. So let me know what you think. I'm quite pleased with both of these. I think a night fighter version would be pretty neato. Since we've got the reconnaissance version and we've kind of got the G was certainly one of the earlier production models. This was from 1942. I guess they could do an E, but be about it. And the J is towards the end of production, but not the very last. With that, I'll let you go. I appreciate you tuning in. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.